On July 16th, 1054, Cardinal Humbert, representing the Catholic Church, entered the Hagia Sophia Cathedral and placed a document before Patriarch Michael of Constantinople, who was preparing for service. He then left first the Hagia Sophia, then Constantinople, returning to Rome. The document declared that the Patriarch had been excommunicated by the Roman Archbishop. On the same day, the Patriarch convened a church council and excommunicated those who had excommunicated him. Thus, July 16th, 1054 was recorded as the date when the Western and Eastern churches officially separated. The roots of what historians call the Great Schism actually extended hundreds of years into the past. Throughout the Middle Ages, one of the fundamental issues of dispute among Christian clergy was which church had universal supremacy. The Roman archbishops argued that supremacy belonged to the Western Church because Peter, one of Jesus' apostles, had come to Rome, established a church there, and was martyred there. According to papal claims, Peter was the first Roman archbishop, and those who came after him sat on the papal throne as his representatives. Jesus himself had designated Peter as the founder of the church. Additionally, Paul, who made great efforts to spread Christianity, had also come to Rome and was martyred there. According to the Western Church's claim, the bones of both were buried beneath a church in the Vatican. For the papacy, all this indicated the universal supremacy of the Roman archbishopric. In contrast, the Eastern Church explained its supremacy with a more worldly approach. Constantinople was the capital of the empire and the emperor's residence. In pre-Christian Roman religion, emperors were considered the head of religious authority. This tradition continued after the empire's capital was moved to Constantinople in the 4th century. Emperors like Constantine, Theodosius, and Justinian had authority in religious matters. For the Eastern Church, the matter was quite simple. They believed that wherever the emperor was, the church there should be superior to all other churches. This struggle for supremacy that continued throughout the Middle Ages played an important role in the division between the Eastern and Western churches. The issue wasn't really about whose reasoning was more sensible. Both churches wanted power over other churches. The cause of the conflict seemed more political than religious, but there was also a cultural dimension. By 1054, there had been some fundamental differences between the two churches for many years. For example, in the Eastern Church, growing a beard had become a tradition among the clergy. In contrast, there was no such tradition in the Western Church. In the Eastern Church, clergy could marry. In the Western Church, they could not. The biggest problem between the two churches was language. When the Roman Empire was divided in 395, the boundaries created were not only political, but also cultural. While Latin culture was dominant in the West, Greek culture was dominant in the East. The official language used by the Western Church was Latin, while the language used in the Eastern Church was Greek. Even emperors had abandoned Latin and started speaking and writing in Greek from the 5th century onward. Language eventually became a major problem between the two churches because they could not keep up with theological discussions. For example, a letter sent to Constantinople in the 5th century remained unanswered for months because there was no one in Rome to translate it. The same was true for Constantinople. Letters sent from Rome were belittled and not considered worth translating because they were in Latin. By the 9th century, some clergy in the Eastern Church were claiming that the Pope spoke the language of barbarians and should never establish authority over Constantinople. Another topic of dispute concerned the Trinity doctrine, specifically the formula of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. In the early years of Christianity, emperors organized a series of councils to reach agreement on religiously controversial issues. The first of these was organized by Emperor Constantine in Nicaea in 325. The formula of the Trinity doctrine was clarified at the Council of Constantinople held in 381. According to this, the Holy Spirit proceeded from the Father. However, the Western Church changed this at the Council of Toledo in 589, accepting that the Holy Spirit proceeded from the Father and the Son. Their reason for doing this was to increase the importance attributed to Jesus. This did not initially create a problem between the two churches because, due to the language problem, The Eastern Church became aware of this decision years later. However, when they did become aware, their attitude was clear. According to them, this was heresy. Historians call this problem the filioque issue. This Latin word means, and from the Son. In the early days of Christianity, there was no hierarchy among the churches. Their relationship was generally at the level of exchanging information. However, with decisions made at general councils, 5 churches were considered superior to others and gained certain powers over churches in their regions. These were, in order, the churches of Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem. Eastern clergy called this system pentarchy, meaning rule of 5. In the early years, the Roman archbishopric was considered to have precedence over other archbishoprics. But over time, emperors began to attract other regional patriarchs to their side to increase the importance of Constantinople and to have more religious authority. This inevitably deepened the division between East and West. In the early years, popes had to bow to the political power of emperors. In fact, imperial support was needed to become pope. This situation continued for several centuries. In 726 AD, Eastern Roman Emperor Leo III banned worship of images and icons of Jesus and saints. Pope Gregory II strongly opposed this practice, called iconoclasm, and wrote a letter declaring the excommunication of everyone involved in this movement. However, because the messengers were arrested in Sicily, which was under Eastern Roman rule, this letter never reached Constantinople. In 751, the Lombards captured several cities in northern Italy and began to threaten Rome. The Pope requested help from the Frankish king Pepin the Short against the Lombards. Being a pious man, Pepin gladly accepted this call, entered Italy with his army, and defeated the Lombards. Pepin's generosity was not limited to this. He announced that he was donating the lands extending from Rome to Ravenna to the papacy. Thus, the Pope became not only the sole religious authority in the West, but also the king of a state located in central Italian territories. The process continued in 800 when Pepin's son Charlemagne was declared emperor by the Pope. During the same years, Empress Irene, a woman, sat on the Eastern Roman throne. The commonly accepted understanding was that the emperor should be male. With Charlemagne's coronation, the emperor now resided in the West. Theoretically, superiority had also passed to the West. Although Irene was deposed in 802 and Nicephorus was declared emperor in her place, neither the papacy nor the Franks accepted to give up their rights to the imperial title. The event that caused the final break occurred shortly after the Normans conquered southern Italy. Initially, much of southern Italy was under Eastern Roman rule. From the 11th century onward, these regions gradually passed into the hands of the Normans, who were affiliated with the Catholic Church. But there was a problem. The churches there continued to practice their rituals according to the principles determined by the East. In 1053, the Pope issued an edict making it mandatory for these churches to switch to Latin rituals. Otherwise, they would all be closed. This decision was met with anger in the East, and in retaliation, the Patriarch announced that all Latin churches in Constantinople would be closed. The disagreement between the two churches had suddenly changed dimension and turned into a diplomatic crisis. To find a middle ground on this issue, the Pope sent a delegation led by French Cardinal Humbert to Constantinople in June 1054. The discussions between Cardinal Humbert and Patriarch Michael went negatively from the moment they began. Humbert had given Michael a letter advising him to submit to papal authority, and the cardinal's condescending attitude during the discussions greatly disturbed Michael. After this, Michael did not receive the Roman delegation for a long time. The cardinals stayed in Constantinople for a few more weeks. Finally, angered by the treatment he received, Humbert entered the Hagia Sophia on the morning of July 16th and placed the excommunication document sealed by the Pope on the altar in front of the Patriarch. This was the last straw. With the emperor's support, the Patriarch excommunicated first Cardinal Humbert, then the delegation that came with him. With this decision, the Eastern and Western churches had completely broken away from each other. Initially, the people were not much affected by this situation. Western and Eastern Christians continued their good relations in regions where where they lived together. But over time, the tension between the churches also drove them apart. With the Crusades, disagreements between peoples intensified, and this disagreement reached its peak in 1204 when the Latins captured Constantinople. Discussions held over the years to reconcile the churches mostly remained inconclusive. This problem between the Eastern and Western churches has still not been resolved today.